The sign of right foundation practice, taken from Recognition of Me is Liberation, by Samraj. From the very beginning of your practice of the only by me revealed and given radical reality of the heart, as my second congregation devotee, the moment-to-moment, whole bodily and really ego-transcending to me-turning exercise of radical devotion to me, or your devotional recognition response to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form and person, is, in coincidence with all the only by me revealed and given functional, practical, relational, and cultural disciplines of ego-transcending right life, the core responsibility of your practice. In due course, in the first congregation context of practice, the core practices of devotion and right life become perpetually conjoined with the ego-transcending root practice or radical process of perfect knowledge. From the beginning of second congregation practice, the foundation of my devotees' practice is real and true moment-to-moment radical devotion to me, and it is only on the basis of that foundationary responsibility, and in order to always further serve and magnify the really and truly moment-to-moment nature of the real and true practice of radical devotion to me, that my devotee engages the responsive disciplines of right life, the supportive or secondary, but always coincident practices of conductivity, the practice of simple name invocation of me, and after the necessarily formal transition to the first congregation of Adidam Vishiradam, the at first preliminary and in due course fully perfect practice of perfect knowledge. My second congregation devotees and my first congregation student beginner devotees engage whole bodily recognition responsive turning to me as a devotional practice, not as a transcendental spiritual practice. The practice I have given to my second congregation devotees and my first congregation student beginner devotees is the devotionally to me responsive turning of the psychophysical faculties to me, together with the devotionally to me responsive embrace of the by me given forms of functional, practical, relational, and cultural self-discipline, and in the first congregation context, the devotionally to me responsive exercise of the preliminary perfect practice, perfect knowledge practice. The transcendental spiritual practice of the only by me revealed and given radical reality aware of the heart, or radical reality aware of Adidam, is possible and is to be formally and thus and thereby fully accountably engaged only after my devotee has made the real and true and full and necessarily formal transition beyond the student beginner stage and into the formal context of ongoing direct and truly me locating and me knowing resort to my avatarically given divine transcendental spiritual transmission under the formally by me established culturally governing authority and formally me extending guidance of the Vishira Sannyasin order or Adidam Vishiradam. Thus, second congregation practice and first congregation student beginner practice in the radical reality way of the heart is not a matter of being transcendentally spiritually infilled by me from above, or indeed of locating me and knowing me transcendently spiritually in any manner whatsoever. Rather, second congregation practice and first congregation student beginner practice in the radical reality way of the heart is a specific devotional but not yet transcendental spiritual yogic or total psychophysical practice that has its own signs, the signs of all the faculties turned to me devotion. In the reality way of Adidam, which is the one and only by me revealed and by me given radical reality way of the heart, the fundamental form of invocation of me, which is practiced by all my formerly practicing devotees, is simply to call on me, generally silently, with the tongue of the mind, but also, under appropriate circumstances, audibly, via my principal divine sacred name Da, or any other of the names I have given to be engaged in the practice of simple name invocation of me. In addition to the practice of simple name invocation of me, my formerly practicing devotees also, in due course, and until the perfect practice, engage the practice of transcendental root standing, or the by me given preliminary root practice of perfect knowledge. And in addition to the practice of simple name invocation of me, my perfect practice devotees who are necessarily full members of either the lay renunciate order of Adidam Rishiradam or the Rishira Sannyasin order of Adidam Rishiradam engage the practice of perfect knowledge in its radical or always at the root perfect practice form of radical self-abiding. When things arise in mind, instead of struggling with them, trying to get rid of them, or trying to surrender them, simply give me your attention, or the core of your mind. Do not try to get rid of the content, or try to surrender the content to me, or try to surrender the content in order to get to me. Simply turn attention itself to my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form and person. No effort is required. You need not struggle with the mind forms. In your simple turning to me, you thereby inherently disregard what is arising in mind. You turn attention to me and thus and thereby forget about mind. You do not try to make something happen in the mind, nor do you try to surrender the mind by surrendering its content to me. You surrender the function of mind by turning your attention to me. The feeling response or heart response to me in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form and person is the core of the practice of the radical devotion to me. To feel me is to turn whole bodily with full heart feeling to me in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form and person. When you feel me thus, you are necessarily, or thereby and thus inherently, entering into ego surrendering, ego forgetting, and ego transcending devotional and, in due course, transcendental spiritual communion with me. When something arises emotionally, a reactive emotion of one kind or another, or an emotional concern or an emotion in relation to anything conditional, instead of trying to open and relax and release the reactive emotion in order to feel me, or struggling with yourself for whatever reason, direct or merely and simply turn the function of emotion to me. The core of the function of emotion is simply feeling. Therefore feel to me. Give me your feeling attention. Direct or merely and simply turn attention or the root of mind and feeling or the root of emotion to me. Similarly, remember me with every breath, invoke me with every breath, and commune with me with every breath. This does not mean that you should necessarily technically engage every inhalation and every exhalation. My admonition to breathe me must be fulfilled artfully in such a way that, even though you are not, as a technical practice, engaging every breath, nevertheless, effectively, every breath is communion with me. In the case of my second congregation devotees and my first congregation student beginner devotees, breathing me is not a transcendental spiritual practice, not a matter of breathing me avatarically, self-transmitted divine transcendental spiritual practice, presence. Rather, in the case of my second congregation devotees and my first congregation student beginner devotees, breathing me is simply a composite part of the total devotional disposition of turning, all the faculties of the total body-mind to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born, bodily, human divine form. Thus, in the case of my second congregation devotees and my first congregation student beginner devotees, the breathing process is to be constantly established in the context of radical devotion to me, and thus constantly engaged in the fundamental total psychophysical disposition of devotional turning to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form. And if the total body-mind, including all of its breathing, feeling, attention, and me-serving action is thus consistently and constantly turned to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form, then, in the case of my thus turned to me second congregation devotees and first congregation student beginner devotees, the breathing process will also secondarily be associated with right conductivity or natural bodily energy, but not yet the direct, true, full, and profound conductivity of my avatarically self-transmitted divine transcendental spiritual presence. As my second congregation devotee or my first congregation student beginner devotee, or indeed as my formerly practicing devotee, at any and every moment, every level of maturity in the only by me revealed and given radical reality of the heart, or radical reality of Adidam, you must also constantly confirm the body itself to me, conform the body-mind to me, in the midst of whatever is arising physically. You must always direct yourself bodily and by means of every bodily action or activity to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born, bodily human divine form and person. Whatever functions you are performing in any moment of functional activity, you should merely and simply turn your feeling attention to me. Always direct or merely and simply turn the body to serving me. Direct the body to be the servant rather than make it the object of your concern. And in the relatively inactive context of sitting to meditate on me, the admonition to serve me is fulfilled by simply, physically, bodily, facing my divinely avatarically born, bodily human divine form, either via the murti or, as the case may be, directly. Taken altogether, the four principal faculties of the body-mind effectively account for all human functions. Because the four principal faculties are senior or always prior to their content, each of the four principal faculties of the body-mind complex is always available either to be reactively turned to its own apparent content, or to be devotionally turned to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form and person. Therefore, truly, there are no moments when the me-beholding turning of the otherwise separate and separative self to me is more difficult than in other moments, unless my devotee turns to and identifies with the apparent content of the separate and separative body-mind self. If my devotee is simply remembering me and invoking me, thus and thereby, whole bodily, therefore truly there are no moments when the me-beholding turning of the otherwise separate and separative self to me is more difficult than in other moments, unless my devotee turns to and identifies with the apparent content of the separate and separative body-mind self. If my devotee is simply remembering me and invoking me, and thus and thereby whole bodily, or at its root, communing with me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form and person, in disposition and intention and action, then the practice of the whole bodily devotional turning to me is direct and inherently easy, or free of struggle with separate and separative self. My devotee who is rightly, truly, fully and fully devotionally practicing whole bodily devotional turning to me, does not in any sense strategically use or seek with or struggle with the separate and separative self. Rather, my devotee who is rightly, truly, fully and fully devotionally practicing whole bodily devotional turning to me makes the separate and separative self itself obsolete by not using it, or that is to say, by allowing the total body-mind, by its four principal faculties, to simply turn to me, and to whole bodily devotionally respond to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form, and to whole bodily devotionally respond to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form and person, until in due course, through ecstatic absorption in and ultimately perfect self-identification, with, and most ultimately divine self-realization of me, the separate and separative self utterly vanishes in me. Therefore, always to me responsively that turn bodily to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form. Always turn to me in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form, by means of the to me responsive exercise of your feeling. Always to me responsively turn your attention to me in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form. Always turn to me by means of the whole bodily to me responsive breathing, regard, and of me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form. Always to me responsively turn your attention to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form. Always turn to me by means of the whole bodily to me responsive breathing regard of me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form. In this manner, always turn all the faculties of the body-mind to me, in and as my divinely avatarically born bodily human divine form and person. Da.